Zoe Carter stepped off the elevator on the 47th floor of Nexus Technologies headquarters, balancing 4 bags of premium sushi worth $218 in her aching arms. Her DoorDash uniform was wrinkled from 12 hours of deliveries, her sneakers held together with duct tape, her braids escaping from the ponytail she'd tied at 5 a.m. that morning. She looked exactly like what she was supposed to look like. Invisible, forgettable, beneath notice. The receptionist barely glanced at her before waving toward the glass-walled conference room at the end of the hall. "Lunch for the board meeting. Don't interrupt. Just set it on the side table and leave." Zoe nodded, keeping her eyes down, keeping her heart rate steady, keeping the tremor out of her hands as she walked toward the room she had spent 2 years trying to enter. Through the glass, she could see them. 15 men in suits worth more than her annual income, gathered around a table that probably cost more than her mother's house. And at the head of the table, gesturing at a presentation screen with the confidence of a man who had never been told no, stood Marcus Webb, the man who had murdered her brother. The conference room fell silent as Zoe entered, the kind of silence that happens when something unpleasant intrudes on something important. She kept her head down, moving toward the side table with practiced invisibility, arranging the sushi containers with careful precision. She had done this 100 times over the past 8 months. Deliveries to this building, to this floor, to this room. She knew the security codes, the meeting schedules, the names and faces of everyone who mattered. She knew that Marcus Webb ordered the same yellowtail sashimi every Tuesday. She knew that the CFO was allergic to shellfish. She knew that the board meetings always ran long because Marcus loved the sound of his own voice, and she knew that today, this specific Tuesday, this specific meeting, was the day that would change everything. Finally, I'm starving. Marcus Webb crossed the room in 3 long strides, not looking at Zoe, looking through her the way people like him always looked through people like her. He was 52 years old, silver-haired, handsome in the way that money makes men handsome, with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life being told he was exceptional. He grabbed a container of sushi, popped it open, and frowned at the contents. "This isn't what I ordered. I specifically asked for extra wasabi." He turned to Zoe, seeing her for the first time, and his expression shifted from annoyance to something uglier. "Are you deaf or just stupid?" Zoe kept her voice neutral, her expression blank. "I'm sorry, sir. The restaurant may have made an error. I can contact them and have a replacement sent." "Don't bother. I don't have time to wait for incompetent delivery girls to fix their mistakes." Marcus reached into his wallet and pulled out a $20 bill, tossing it at Zoe's face. The bill fluttered down, landing on her shoulder before sliding to the floor. "Keep the change. And next time, try using whatever brain cells you have left to get the order right." He paused, his eyes traveling over her uniform, her worn shoes, her dark skin. "Actually, no. Don't come back. I'll request a different driver. Someone who looks more professional." The room was silent. 14 men in expensive suits watched this exchange without a word, their faces carefully neutral, their discomfort hidden behind years of practice at ignoring things that made them uncomfortable. Zoe bent down to pick up the $20 bill, her fingers brushing the carpet, her eyes catching the presentation screen behind Marcus for the first time. And everything inside her went cold. The screen showed a logo she would recognize anywhere, a butterfly with wings made of circuit patterns, its body formed from lines of code that spiraled into infinity. Below the logo, in letters 3 feet tall, "Butterfly Algorithm, IPO launch, $3.2 billion valuation." And below that, in smaller text that made Zoe's blood turn to ice, "Designed by the Nexus Technologies Innovation Team. Patent pending. Designed by the Nexus Technologies Innovation Team." 3 years of her brother's life condensed into a lie that would make Marcus Webb a billionaire. "Is there a problem?" Marcus had noticed her staring at the screen, his voice sharp with suspicion. "I said you could leave. That means leave, now." Zoe straightened slowly, the $20 bill clutched in her hand, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her temples. She had waited 2 years for this moment. 2 years of planning, of gathering evidence, of working 12-hour shifts as a delivery driver just to get access to this building. 2 years of watching Marcus Webb give interviews about his breakthrough innovation, of seeing his face on magazine covers, of reading articles that praised his genius while her brother rotted in a grave that should never have been dug. She had promised herself she would stay calm, stay invisible, wait for the perfect moment. But looking at that screen, at the butterfly her brother had designed for their sister, stolen and repackaged and sold for billions, Zoe felt something shift inside her. The careful control she had maintained for 2 years began to crack, and behind it was rage, pure, incandescent, righteous rage. "The butterfly," she said quietly, her voice cutting through the silence of the conference room. "Do you know why it's called that?" Marcus blinked, confusion replacing the contempt on his face. "What?" "The algorithm. The one you're about to sell for $3 billion. Do you know why it's called butterfly?" The room had gone very still. The 14 board members exchanged glances, sensing that something had shifted, that this was no longer a simple interaction between a powerful man and an insignificant delivery girl. Marcus's eyes narrowed. "I designed that algorithm. I named it. It's called butterfly because of the butterfly effect. Small inputs creating large outputs. Now get out of my conference room before I call security." Zoe smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "That's a nice story, but it's not true." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object, a USB drive shaped like a butterfly, its wings painted in iridescent blue and purple. "My brother designed that algorithm. He named it Butterfly because our little sister loves butterflies. She collects them, draws them, has them on everything she owns. She's 16 years old, and she's been mute since birth. Elijah created that algorithm so she could speak." The silence in the room was absolute. Marcus's face had gone pale, his eyes fixed on the USB drive in Zoe's hand like it was a loaded weapon. "I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know anyone named Elijah. And I'm going to give you 5 seconds to leave before I have you arrested for trespassing. Elijah Carter." Zoe's voice was steady, each word a hammer blow. 26 years old, MIT graduate, software engineer at Nexus Technologies from 2019 to 2022, died on June 15, 2022, in what the police called an accidental drowning. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. "Except Elijah was a competitive swimmer in college. He trained in that pool 3 times a week. And he didn't drown by accident. He was murdered. By you." The room erupted. Board members were on their feet, voices overlapping, phones being pulled from pockets. Marcus was shouting something about security, about lawsuits, about the deranged accusations of a disturbed delivery girl. But Zoe wasn't listening. She was walking toward the presentation screen, toward the laptop that controlled it, toward the moment she had spent 2 years building. She plugged in the USB drive. The screen flickered. The slick marketing presentation, the charts and graphs and carefully crafted lies, disappeared. In its place was a video file already playing, showing 2 men in an office that Zoe recognized immediately. It was this office, this building. The timestamp in the corner read June 14th, 2022, 1 day before Elijah died. "I'm not signing anything." Elijah's voice filled the conference room, young and angry and painfully alive. On the screen, he was standing across from Marcus Webb, a document clutched in his hands. "This is my work. I spent 3 years developing this algorithm. You can't just take it and pretend you created it." I can do whatever I want." Marcus's voice was different in the recording, sharper, crueler, stripped of the polished charm he showed to investors and journalists. "You're a junior engineer with no connections and no credibility. I'm the CTO of a billion-dollar company. Who do you think people will believe? I have documentation. I have the original code. I have proof. You have nothing." Marcus leaned forward, his face filling the frame. "And after tonight, you'll have even less. Elijah, let me make this very clear. You are going to sign that document. You are going to transfer all intellectual property rights to Nexus Technologies, and you are going to walk away quietly. If you don't—" He paused, and his smile was the most terrifying thing Zoe had ever seen. Accidents happen every day, especially to people who swim alone at night. The recording continued, but Zoe wasn't watching it anymore. She was watching Marcus Webb, watching the color drain from his face, watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. The board members had stopped shouting. They were staring at the screen with expressions of horror, disbelief, the dawning realization that they had been building their fortunes on the grave of a murdered man. "That's not—" Marcus's voice cracked. "That recording is fake. It's been manipulated. This woman is clearly mentally unstable, and I demand—" "There's more." Zoe's voice cut through his protest like a blade. She pressed a key on the laptop, and the screen changed again. Now it showed a document, an autopsy report, official letterhead, medical terminology. The official cause of death was drowning, but the original autopsy found something else. Traces of Rohypnol in Elijah's bloodstream. A date rape drug, enough to render him unconscious before he ever hit the water. She pressed another key. "This is the original report, and this—" Another document appeared, nearly identical but with key sections changed. "This is the report that was filed with the police. Notice anything different?" The room was silent except for the hum of the air conditioning and the ragged sound of Marcus Webb's breathing. On the screen, the two documents were displayed side by side, the differences highlighted in red. The toxicology results altered, the conclusion changed from suspicious circumstances to accidental drowning. The signature at the bottom, the same on both documents. Dr. Sarah Webb, medical examiner. "Sarah Webb," Zoe said, "your ex-wife, the mother of your children, the woman you've been threatening with custody battles for the past 5 years." She pulled out her phone and pressed play on an audio file. A woman's voice filled the room, shaking with fear and exhaustion. "He told me if I didn't change the report, he would take my children. He has lawyers, money, connections. I have nothing. I knew what I was doing was wrong. I knew I was covering up a murder. But I couldn't lose my kids. I couldn't—" The voice broke into sobs. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I've been living with this for 2 years. And I can't do it anymore. I'll testify. I'll tell them everything. Just please, please help me get my children back." Zoe stopped the recording. The silence that followed was the loudest thing she had ever heard. "Dr. Webb gave that statement to federal investigators 3 days ago," Zoe said. "Along with the original autopsy report, her personal notes from the examination, and a detailed account of every threat Marcus made against her and her children. She's currently in protective custody, and she's agreed to testify at his trial." Zoe turned to face the board members, who were staring at her with expressions ranging from shock to fury to something that might have been shame. "The FBI will be here in approximately 15 minutes. The SEC has already frozen all Nexus accounts pending investigation, and every journalist in the country is about to receive a copy of everything you just saw." Marcus Webb lunged at her. It was a desperate, unthinking movement, the reaction of a cornered animal with nothing left to lose. But Zoe had been expecting it. She sidestepped easily, letting his momentum carry him past her, watching him stumble and crash into the side table, sending sushi containers flying across the room. He landed on his hands and knees, his designer suit stained with soy sauce and wasabi, his face contorted with rage and terror. "You can't do this," he gasped. "You don't understand. The IPO. There are billions of dollars at stake. Investors, employees, the entire company. The entire company was built on stolen technology and a murdered man's grave." Zoe's voice was cold, flat, empty of the rage that had been burning inside her for 2 years. The rage was gone now, replaced by something cleaner, something closer to peace. "My brother spent 3 years of his life creating something beautiful, something that was supposed to help people who couldn't speak, people like our sister, who has never been able to say, 'I love you,' out loud because she was born without a voice. He designed Butterfly for her, and you killed him for it." She walked toward Marcus, stopping just out of arm's reach, looking down at the man who had destroyed her family. "You threw $20 in my face and told me I wasn't professional enough to deliver your lunch. You didn't even see me as human. I was just another black girl in a delivery uniform, another invisible person to step on while you climbed your way to the top." She held up the Butterfly USB drive, letting the light catch its iridescent wings. "But I've been watching you for 2 years, Marcus. I know every secret, every lie, every drop of blood on your hands. You thought I was nobody. You were wrong." The elevator doors opened, and 6 FBI agents in tactical gear stepped out, followed by 2 men in suits who Zoe recognized as investigators from the Securities and Exchange Commission. Behind them, a crowd of journalists was already gathering in the lobby, cameras and microphones ready, the story of the century unfolding in real time. "Marcus Webb?" The lead agent approached, hand on his weapon, eyes scanning the room. "FBI, you're under arrest for the murder of Elijah Carter, obstruction of justice, securities fraud, and witness tampering. You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Marcus didn't resist as they handcuffed him. All the fight had gone out of him, replaced by the hollow expression of a man watching his entire life collapse. As they led him past Zoe, he stopped, looking at her with something that might have been curiosity, might have been hatred, might have been a desperate attempt to understand how everything had gone so wrong. "Who are you?" he whispered. "How did you—" "I'm Zoe Carter." She met his eyes without flinching. "Elijah's sister. Lily's sister. The delivery girl you threw money at. The nobody who just ended your career." She paused, letting the words sink in. "And I'm the woman who's going to make sure the whole world knows what you did." They led him away, and Zoe stood alone in the conference room, surrounded by scattered sushi and abandoned phones and the wreckage of a $3 billion fraud. The board members had fled, their lawyers already on the phone, their loyalty to Marcus evaporating the moment it became a liability. The presentation screen still showed the Butterfly logo, but now it looked different to Zoe. Not a symbol of stolen genius, but a memorial to a brother who had died trying to give his sister a voice. Her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "We got him. It's over. Sarah." Zoe read the message twice, then slipped her phone back into her pocket. It wasn't over. There would be trials and testimony and endless legal proceedings. There would be journalists asking questions and lawyers demanding answers and a system that would try its best to protect the powerful at the expense of the powerless. But for the first time in 2 years, Zoe allowed herself to believe that justice was possible, that the truth could win, that her brother's death had not been in vain. She picked up the $20 bill from where it had fallen on the floor. She looked at it for a long moment, remembering the contempt on Marcus's face when he threw it at her, the casual cruelty of a man who saw other human beings as obstacles to be removed. Then she folded it carefully and put it in her pocket. She would frame it someday, she decided. A reminder of how far she had come. A reminder that the people who underestimate you are often the ones who give you the power to destroy them. Zoe Carter walked out of Nexus Technologies headquarters with her head held high, past the FBI agents and the journalists and the chaos she had created. She had come in as a delivery girl, She was leaving as something else entirely. Behind her, the butterfly logo flickered on the abandoned screen, its wings still spreading, its code still running, waiting to be reclaimed by the family it had always belonged to. The story of Nexus Technologies and the butterfly algorithm dominated the news cycle for weeks. Every major outlet covered the scandal: the murdered engineer, the falsified autopsy, the ex-wife who had finally found the courage to tell the truth. Marcus Webb's face appeared on the cover of every newspaper and magazine, no longer the celebrated innovator, but the villain in a story that captivated the nation. But the coverage that mattered most to Zoe was the smallest. A 3-minute segment on a local news station featuring a young woman with warm brown eyes and a nervous smile, demonstrating a technology that had been designed just for her. Lily Carter was 16 years old and had never spoken a word out loud. She had been born with a rare condition that affected her vocal cords, rendering her physically incapable of producing sound. For her entire life, she had communicated through sign language, written notes, and the patient understanding of family members who loved her unconditionally. She had never complained about her silence. She had never asked for pity. But Zoe knew, from the way Lily's eyes would linger on people having conversations, from the way she would touch her throat sometimes, as if checking to see if anything had changed. Zoe knew that Lily's silence was a cage she had long ago stopped hoping to escape. Elijah had refused to accept that cage. From the moment he learned to code, he had been obsessed with finding a way to give his little sister a voice. He had studied linguistics, neuroscience, machine learning, anything that might help him build a bridge between Lily's silent world and the speaking world around her. The butterfly algorithm was the culmination of a decade of work, a system that could read lip movements, facial expressions, and subtle muscular signals, translating them into natural-sounding speech in real time. It wasn't perfect. It required practice and calibration and patience. But it worked, and Elijah had been weeks away from releasing it as a free, open-source tool for people with speech disabilities everywhere when Marcus Webb had decided that generosity was bad for business. Now, 2 years after her brother's death, Zoe watched as Lily sat in front of a camera and spoke for the first time. "My name is Lily Carter." The voice coming from the tablet in front of her was synthetic but warm, carefully calibrated to match what speech therapists estimated Lily's natural voice would have sounded like. "I'm 16 years old, and I want to say something I've never been able to say before." She paused, her eyes glistening with tears, her hands trembling as they rested on the table. "Thank you, Elijah. Thank you for never giving up on me. Thank you for believing I deserved a voice, even when the world told you it wasn't worth your time. I love you. I miss you. And I promise I'll use the gift you gave me to help other people find their voices too." Zoe was crying before Lily finished the first sentence. She had watched the segment 100 times, and it still destroyed her every time. The look on Lily's face when she realized the technology was working. The way her mother had collapsed into sobs, holding her daughter, hearing words she had never expected to hear. The messages that had flooded in from around the world, other people with speech disabilities, other families who had been told their loved ones would never communicate normally, all of them reaching out to ask, "How can we get this? When will it be available? How much does it cost?" The answer to that last question was the part that mattered most to Zoe. Under Marcus Webb's plan, the butterfly algorithm would have been sold as a premium medical device, priced at $15,000 for the basic package, with additional fees for updates, customization, and technical support. It would have been marketed to wealthy families and high-end hospitals, generating billions in revenue while the people who needed it most, people like Lily, who had grown up in poverty, whose mother had worked 3 jobs just to keep a roof over their heads, would never be able to afford it. That wasn't what Elijah had wanted, and it wasn't what Zoe was going to allow. The legal battle over the butterfly algorithm lasted 8 months. Marcus Webb's lawyers argued that the technology belonged to Nexus Technologies, that Elijah had signed an employment agreement assigning all intellectual property rights to the company, that the Carter family had no legal claim to the algorithm, regardless of who had actually created it. They produced contracts and documents and legal precedents, marshaling every resource available to the wealthy and powerful to protect the fortune they had built on a dead man's work. Zoe had resources of her own. Not money. She was still broke, still working as a delivery driver, still living in the same cramped apartment she had shared with her mother and sister since childhood. But she had something more valuable than money: evidence. The USB drive Elijah had given her didn't just contain recordings of Marcus's threats. It contained the original source code for the butterfly algorithm, complete with timestamps, version histories, and comments written in Elijah's distinctive voice. It contained emails between Elijah and Marcus, documenting the steady progression from collaboration to exploitation to threat. And it contained Elijah's personal notes, thousands of pages of documentation proving beyond any doubt that he and he alone had created the technology that Marcus had tried to steal. The court ruled in the Carter family's favor 9 months after the trial began. The butterfly algorithm was declared the intellectual property of the Elijah Carter estate, with full rights reverting to his surviving family members. Nexus Technologies was ordered to pay damages, restitution, and legal fees totaling $1.2 billion. And Marcus Webb, already facing life in prison for murder, obstruction, and fraud, watched from his cell as the empire he had built crumbled into nothing. Zoe could have taken the money and walked away. $1.2 billion was more than enough to set her family up for life, to pay for Lily's education, to buy her mother the house she had always dreamed of. She could have licensed the algorithm to a medical technology company, negotiated a percentage of sales, lived comfortably on the royalties, while someone else handled the complicated work of turning Elijah's invention into a real product. But that wasn't what Elijah would have wanted. And it wasn't what Lily needed. On the 1-year anniversary of the court ruling, Zoe stood before a crowd of 200 people gathered in the auditorium of the Elijah Carter Community Center, a facility she had built with a portion of the settlement money, located in the same neighborhood where she and Elijah and Lily had grown up. The audience included disability rights advocates, speech therapists, families of people with communication disorders, and journalists who had followed the case from the beginning. They were here for an announcement that would change millions of lives. 3 years ago, Zoe began, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. My brother was murdered for trying to give my sister a voice. He created something beautiful, something revolutionary, something that could have helped millions of people around the world. And a man who cared about nothing but money decided that generosity was worth less than profit. She paused, looking out at the audience, seeing faces she recognized. Dr. Sarah Webb, who had testified against Marcus and was now rebuilding her life with her children. Thomas Okonkwo, the journalist who had helped Zoe gather evidence for 2 years. Maria Gonzalez, the former Nexus employee who had been fired for knowing too much and had risked everything to help bring Marcus down. Today I'm keeping a promise I made to my brother, a promise to finish what he started, a promise to make sure that the technology he died for would be available to everyone who needs it, not just the wealthy, not just the privileged, but everyone. She pressed a button on the remote in her hand, and the screen behind her came to life. The butterfly logo appeared, but it was different now. Instead of the cold corporate design Marcus had created, it was the original version Elijah had drawn, warm and colorful and full of life. Below it, in letters that made the audience gasp, were the words, "Butterfly Algorithm." Now available free worldwide. The butterfly algorithm is now open source, Zoe continued, her voice rising above the murmurs of shock and excitement. Anyone, anywhere in the world can download it, use it, and modify it without paying a single dollar. We've partnered with disability rights organizations in 47 countries to provide training and support. We've created translation modules for 32 languages. And we've established the Elijah Carter Foundation, which will fund ongoing development and ensure that this technology remains free and accessible forever. She looked down at the front row where Lily was sitting with their mother, tears streaming down both their faces. Elijah didn't create Butterfly to make money. He created it because he loved his sister, and he couldn't accept a world where she couldn't speak. He believed that everyone deserves a voice, not just the people who can afford one. And now, because of your support, because of everyone who fought for justice, because of a delivery girl who refused to stay invisible, she smiled. The first genuine smile she had allowed herself in 3 years. That belief is finally becoming reality. The applause that followed was deafening. People were on their feet, crying, hugging strangers, overcome by the magnitude of what they had just witnessed. Zoe stood at the podium and let it wash over her, feeling something loosen in her chest that had been tight for so long she had forgotten what it felt like to breathe freely. She had done it. She had kept her promise. Elijah could finally rest. 5 years later, the butterfly algorithm had transformed the lives of over 4 million people worldwide. It had been adopted by schools, hospitals, and government agencies in 93 countries. It had spawned an entire ecosystem of related technologies, apps that helped deaf people communicate with hearing people, devices that allowed paralyzed patients to speak through eye movements, systems that translated sign language into speech in real time. What had begun as one man's gift to his sister had become a global movement, a fundamental shift in how society thought about communication and disability. Lily Carter was 21 years old now, a junior at Stanford University studying computer science and linguistics. She had become an advocate for disability rights, traveling the world to speak at conferences and universities, demonstrating the technology that had given her a voice. She was funny, brilliant, passionate, all the things she had always been, but now visible to the world in a way that her silence had previously prevented. Zoe watched from the wings as Lily took the stage at the annual TED conference, her tablet held casually in one hand, the butterfly logo glowing softly on its screen. The audience of 3,000 fell silent as Lily raised her hand in greeting, a smile spreading across her face. "Good afternoon." Her synthetic voice filled the auditorium, warm and confident, as natural as any speaker who had come before her. "My name is Lily Carter, and I want to tell you a story about butterflies." She pressed a button, and the screen behind her showed an old photograph. 2 children, a boy and a girl, sitting in a field of wildflowers. The girl was holding a butterfly in her cupped hands, her face alight with wonder. The boy was watching her with an expression of pure love. "This is me and my brother Elijah, 20 years ago. I was 5. He was 11. And this was the day he made me a promise." Lily paused, letting the image sink in. "I had just caught my first butterfly. I was so excited. I wanted to tell everyone, to shout about how beautiful it was, how magical it felt to hold something so delicate in my hands. But I couldn't speak. I couldn't make a sound. All I could do was cry because I had something so precious and no way to share it." She looked at the photograph, and her smile softened. "Elijah held me while I cried, and when I was done, he looked me in the eyes and made me a promise. He said, 'Lily, I'm going to find a way to give you a voice. I don't care how long it takes. I don't care how hard it is. Someday, you're going to be able to tell the whole world about your butterflies.'" She lowered her hand, and the image changed, now showing lines of code, algorithms, the digital architecture of the technology she was using to speak. He kept that promise. He spent 15 years working on this technology, sacrificing everything, refusing to give up even when everyone told him it was impossible. And when powerful people tried to steal his work, tried to turn his gift into a product only the wealthy could afford, her voice hardened slightly, the way it always did when she spoke about this part of the story. My sister Zoe stopped them. She spent 2 years as a delivery driver, building a case, gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment to expose the truth. She walked into a boardroom full of billionaires and brought down an empire. Not because she wanted money or fame, because she made a promise too. The screen changed again, showing Zoe in her DoorDash uniform, standing in the Nexus conference room, the butterfly USB drive in her hand. The image had become iconic in the year since the trial, the moment that had launched 1,000 think pieces about power, justice, and the people we overlook. Today, over 4 million people use the butterfly algorithm. 4 million people who were told they would never speak, never communicate, never have a voice. 4 million people who are now sharing their stories, their ideas, their love with a world that finally has the technology to listen. Lily looked out at the audience, and there were tears in her eyes now, but she was smiling. I used to dream about catching butterflies. Now I dream about something bigger. I dream about a world where no one is silenced, where every person, no matter their ability, no matter their circumstances, has the power to be heard. That was my brother's dream. It's my dream now. And with your help, she spread her arms wide, encompassing the audience, the cameras, the millions of people watching around the world. It can be everyone's dream. The standing ovation lasted 4 minutes. Lily stood at the center of the stage, bathed in light, receiving the applause of thousands of people who had been moved by her words. And in the wings, hidden from the cameras, Zoe Carter watched her sister with tears streaming down her face. She was wearing the butterfly USB drive on a chain around her neck. She never took it off, never went anywhere without this last gift from her brother. She touched it now, feeling the familiar shape of the wings, remembering the day Elijah had pressed it into her hands and told her, "If anything happens to me, keep this safe. It's the proof of everything." He had been right. It was the proof of everything. The proof that one person could make a difference. The proof that injustice, no matter how powerful, could be defeated. The proof that a delivery girl nobody noticed could bring down an empire and change the world. Zoe had spent 2 years of her life being invisible. She had delivered thousands of meals to people who never looked at her face, never learned her name, never saw her as anything more than a means of getting what they wanted. She had been mocked, ignored, dismissed, treated like something less than human. And she had used that invisibility as a weapon. She had watched and waited and gathered evidence, becoming the ghost in the machine of Nexus technologies, the silent observer who saw everything because no one thought she was worth watching. She had taken the contempt of powerful men and turned it into their downfall. Now, 5 years later, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was the executive director of the Elijah Carter Foundation, overseeing a global operation that had changed millions of lives. She gave speeches and interviews and testimony before Congress. She was recognized on the street, stopped by strangers who wanted to thank her, held up as an example of what one person could achieve through courage and determination. But sometimes, late at night, Zoe still put on her old DoorDash uniform and made deliveries around the city. She didn't need the money anymore. She did it to remember what it felt like to be invisible, to remember the people who were still overlooked, still dismissed, still waiting for someone to see their worth. And sometimes, when she delivered food to expensive restaurants or corporate offices, she would see someone being cruel to a service worker, a barista, a janitor, a security guard, and she would step in. She would introduce herself. She would tell them, quietly but firmly, that the person they were mistreating was a human being who deserved respect. "You never know who you're talking to," she would say, smiling her secret smile. "You never know what they're capable of." And then she would leave, disappearing into the night, just another delivery driver in a city full of invisible people. But she wasn't invisible. Not anymore. Not to the 4 million people using her brother's technology. Not to the world that had finally learned to listen. And somewhere, in whatever place the dead go to rest, Elijah Carter was watching his sisters. One speaking to thousands on a stage lit by spotlights, one slipping through shadows with a secret smile. And he was proud. His butterflies were flying, and they would never stop. Epilogue. 10 years after the fall of Nexus Technologies, a young girl in a village in rural Kenya touched a tablet screen and spoke her first words. Her name was Amara. She was 12 years old, and she had been mute since birth. A condition her family couldn't afford to treat, in a village with no speech therapists or medical specialists or any of the resources that wealthy countries took for granted. She had grown up in silence, communicating through gestures and expressions, watching other children laugh and talk and sing, while she remained trapped behind a wall of soundlessness. Then the Butterfly Foundation had come to her village. They had brought tablets loaded with the algorithm, volunteers trained in calibration and support, and a message that Amara had never dared to believe. You have a voice. We're going to help you find it. Now, after weeks of practice and adjustment, Amara was ready. Her family gathered around her. Her mother, her father, her 3 siblings, her grandmother who had traveled 2 days to witness this moment. The volunteer from the foundation knelt beside her, adjusting the tablet, making sure everything was working properly. Whenever you're ready, the volunteer said gently. Take your time. Amara looked at her family, at the faces she had loved her entire life, the people she had never been able to speak to, the words she had carried inside her for 12 years without any way to let them out. She opened her mouth. She moved her lips. And for the first time in her life, she heard her own voice. Mama, she said, and her mother burst into tears. Baba, she said, and her father fell to his knees. I love you, she said, and her grandmother clutched her heart and whispered prayers of gratitude to God. Amara was crying now, laughing and crying at the same time, overwhelmed by the miracle of her own voice. She said her siblings' names one by one. She said the name of her village, her country, her continent. She said hello and goodbye and thank you, and every word she had ever wanted to speak, a flood of language pouring out of her like water from a broken dam. And on the tablet screen, the butterfly logo glowed softly, its wings spread wide, carrying her words out into the world. 3,000 miles away, in a conference room in Chicago, Zoe Carter received a video message. She watched the footage of Amara speaking for the first time, watched the joy on the girl's face, watched a family transformed by a technology that had been created in a cramped apartment in Chicago by a young man who refused to accept that his sister couldn't speak. Zoe touched the butterfly USB drive around her neck, the same one she had carried into that boardroom 10 years ago. The same one that had started everything. You did it, Elijah, she whispered. You gave them all a voice. And somewhere, in the space between heartbeats, she could have sworn she heard her brother whisper back, No, we did it. Together. The butterfly algorithm is now available in 147 countries and 89 languages. Over 12 million people use it daily. It remains completely free. The Elijah Carter Foundation continues to fund research, development, and distribution of communication technologies for people with disabilities worldwide. Zoe Carter serves as the foundation's executive director. She still makes deliveries sometimes. Lily Carter completed her Ph.D. in computational linguistics and now leads the foundation's research division. She speaks at conferences around the world, advocating for disability rights and accessible technology. Marcus Webb died in prison in 2031. He never apologized. The butterfly USB drive is now displayed at the Smithsonian Institution, alongside a plaque that reads, They mocked the delivery girl. She saved everything. In memory of Elijah Carter, who believed everyone deserves a voice.